Hi, I'm Lisa K. Donner, along with Andrew Moran, Sarah Calgill, Jeff Charles, and Dave Patterson. And this is the Conservative Five, Liberty Nation's online TV news program. Within the span of 2 weeks, the Norfolk Southern Railroad experienced 2 derailments. This type of train jumping the tracks is not that uncommon until you add in a toxic chemical spill, and then things get a bit dicey. The derailment in Palestine, Ohio, has been used by Republicans to attack the president and the Secretary of Transportation, but is it warranted? I want to start off with Jeff, talk about the political optics, and then shift to Dave for an analysis of what happened and why.
Yeah, the optics ain't good for Biden, but they are good for Trump. I mean, Trump has capitalized on the situation. I mean, and we've talked about this. I mean, Biden chose to go overseas when he has a crisis in Ohio, and he hasn't bothered to show up. He hasn't said much about it. They've even been kind of struggling to get money from FEMA. Meanwhile, Trump said, yeah, I'll go to Palestine. I'll go to East Palestine. I'll go to Ohio. And he did. But I think this is even more significant than it seems, because this is kind of Trump starting to hit his stride a little bit. I mean, he announced last year, and it's kind of been low key since then, which isn't his normal style. He's released some videos, but hasn't done a lot of rallies. He showed up. He went to McDonald's. He bought McDonald's for everybody in the restaurant. He bought McDonald's for law enforcement, for the fire department. We all know the man loves McDonald's. And he said what he needed to say. Savannah Hernandez, a journalist, interviewed him and said, and she asked President Trump, you know, what message do you have for Joe Biden right now? And Trump said, get over here. Yeah. Perfect. That was brilliant. So politically, bad for Biden, great for Trump.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, how hard is this? I mean,
it's not hard. Biden should have been there all along.
It's politics 101.
Oh, yeah, it's a no-brainer. But I'm going to let Dave speak to some of that politics 101. On my end of it, you know, it's 2 years out. So I have to say, when you're doing a presidential race, it's grueling. And I don't see him going to spend all of his energy and capital in the first few months. So lethargic, call it what you want. He's just pacing himself. And that's what he has to do in order to go to the finish line. So that is my one comment on why Trump seems to be, you know, just kind of hanging around in the ether. The other thing is East Palestine is a little rural area, really close to the Pennsylvania border. And these people have been hammered. They don't have resources to deal with this. And Trump shows up. He makes a few phone calls. His kid makes a few phone calls. And they have cleaning supplies coming down from Michigan, you know, all paid for, ready to go. They have truckloads of water coming. Trump brought him on his plane with him. He's out there shaking hands with everybody and talking to people. And you can hear the crowd from a distance yelling, "Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. We love you, President Trump." And, you know, it would be nice if anybody from the feds would show up and act like they give a darn about, you know, small town in Ohio that voted for Trump. It'd be nice if they cared.
Yeah, it was really shocking, Dave, when I first heard that FEMA said no to the people in East Palestine. Now they've done a volte-face on that and they've changed it around. And then there's been the Secretary of Transportation who's been sloth-like slow in responding to this. I mean, he put out a harshly worded message a day ago, and now he says he's going to drop on in. Well, it's been 2 weeks. What does this say to the people of Palestine?
Well, what it says is that this administration is late to need, or if they're at all, ever. Their crisis management is the worst in history. But, you know, think about it. This event took place on February 3rd, 20 days ago. Mm-hmm. Nobody mentioned it. The media didn't mention it for almost a week until Liberty Nation came out with a story on it. This is really an incredible statement about how this administration makes decisions. Late to need, if at all. Now,
well, they don't rescue anymore. They just wait, and then they go directly to recovery. They don't care about the rescue part anymore. They just go to recovery, cleanup. We're going to clean it up after it's all said and done. But, there are people in need there, and that just irritates the dickens out of me.
Now, think about that in terms of national security. This has
Yeah.
been the hallmark of this administration. They were late to need, dithering and screwing around with Afghanistan. They did the same thing in Ukraine. They didn't bother to do anything for a year before the invasion. In fact, in June, if you'll recall, when the big summit between President Biden and President Putin in 2001, everybody was all excited. What happened? Biden went away from that meeting and stopped all aid to Ukraine until November.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. That's a good point, Dave.
And this has just been what this administration has been about. And yet here we are trusting them in a world where Russia has now said they're pulling out of the New START treaty. China is making great overtures to Russia. This nation is in extremis and needs to understand that.
Andrew, let's look at the dollars and nonsense. What we got going on here is Buttigieg says in his strongly worded letter that Norfolk Southern better get on the stick. They better clean this up. But meantime, the CEO of Norfolk Southern was there like the day before he even spoke and said, we're really sorry. We take responsibility for this.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say something. I do believe, and maybe Andrew, I do believe that while the trains are Norfolk Southern's, all the tracks in the United States of America are owned and run and operated by the federal government. Am I correct in that? Does anybody know?
Yes, that's partially true, and a lot of them is dilapidated, and it's frustrating though because for the right, they always say, Biden's spending billions of dollars in Ukraine, and then they complain about this bipartisan infrastructure law that would spend hundreds of billions of dollars on infrastructure in the United States. So that's the balancing act that the right has to pay. There was a comment that Dave made about national security. I think there are many components that people are missing that all over the country. There are these toxic chemical incidents transpiring that's going into the air. In Tucson, Arizona, in the last week, there was a shelter in place because there was a toxic chemical leak. There was a massive fire recently in a warehouse storing plastic plant pots in Florida and resulted in hazmat teams monitoring the air quality. There was a metal manufacturing plant in Ohio that there was an explosion. There was another trail derailment carrying toxic chemicals in Michigan. There was other trail derailment in Houston, also carrying toxic chemicals. So you have to, and then, there's so much going on from Hawaii to Texas, Louisiana. There's so much going on. It makes you wonder what is happening. I mean, is there a deliberate sabotage act happening? Is everything just dilapidated in the infrastructure? Is there a foreign player involved? It's just everything's happening simultaneously in just a 1 month span. It makes you start asking questions and asking why this is occurring. Maybe Dave can allude to that, but this is it's mind-numbing it's befuddling to watch of what's transpiring.
I think one of the statistics that echoes what you're saying, Andrew, is that there have been more electric grid attacks in this year than ever before.
So are you suggesting then that that opens a can of worms then?
No, what I'm saying, I'm kind of,
Let's just stick with the facts and skip the conspiracy theory.
He's saying, who's John Galt?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I do know that, the railroad, Norfolk Southern, they're a tier 1 railroad, and they do have their own responsibilities, and they run right through the tiny little rural part of my world, and they are Johnny on the spot. If there is anything going on, if there's anything with the tracks, or they're right there. So I do know there's a difference between the tier 1 tracks and the other tracks that they have to cross. So I'm not saying that it's anybody else's fault, but I do know that they're there, and even though they're getting booed and treated like crap, I do have a good contact within the railroad, and it's like, it's not so much the government's fault, it's the government's lack of response to the situation. And that's what the railroad people are saying, that Trump showed up and they are bless him. He's there to help take a little bit of heat from them. So that's what I know from that angle.
You're right. I mean, you've really put your finger on it. The response is always, oh, it's private industry's fault. And I'm not saying that Norfolk Southern is clean on this, but I'm just saying that the tracks are taken care of by the feds. They can't wait to point the finger at the private industry. Private industry showed up before Biden even called, before Buttigieg even wrote his letter. Let's just say this. This toxic spill is also a political mess too.
Mhm.
And I think there's going to be a lot of cleanup being done on aisle 9 around East Palestine.
Or aisle 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Well, the administration is
Yeah.
already blaming Trump for what happened because they say that he deregulated parts of the train industry that led to this incident. But even though they could have just reversed that because they had control of the White House, Senate, and Congress for about 2 years, and they still control
Neither
the
of those things had anything to contribute to what the accident was in itself. Train derailments happen. I mean, they do. They're not always toxic. When they are, that's when they make the news. But they do go off the tracks periodically for a whole bunch of reasons, mostly infrastructure reasons, mostly, track problems. But, in this case, they spilled something that was really bad. And that's why there needed to be a better response to it.
To your point, Sarah, in 2022, there have been 800 derailments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's common. It is not uncommon. You just don't hear about them because they don't cause loss of life. They don't impact communities like this. They don't have that toxic spill in the air. And that's why, it's pretty common, but it's uncommon. It's like a fender bender versus, a 14-car pileup on the interstate.
And while we've
I'm
been
laughing
talking,
not because of the situation. I'm laughing not because of the situation, but because I've already read my clothes. We're wildly over time. Say goodbye, guys. Bye.
goodbye.
That's it for our C5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform. YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble, we're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. Thanks for tuning in. And remember, surf on over to libertynation.com. Special thanks to our fantastic editor and post coordinator, Frank Diorio, and our executive producer, Sarah Cowgill. I'm Lisa K. Donner, editor-in-chief. Thanks so much for joining us today. This has been a production of libertynation.com, where truth matters.